Hey, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. Today we'll be talking about grid systems and their fundamentals, as well as text hierarchy in Figma. I'll be walking through a practical example on how to use these, so I hope you follow along with everything I do, as these are really important concepts to understand, and they can really upgrade your design once you understand them and know how to use them. So stick around for this video, and I hope you enjoy. Alright, so before I show you how to make a grid, I want to give you an example of a bad website that does not utilize grids. And warning, it's awful to look at. There it is. I gave you the warning. This is disgusting. We see it's very cluttered. It doesn't communicate well. We feel lost, overwhelmed. It's just not a fun time when we're on this website. We see things are not spaced evenly. It's just out of order. There's no layout. The font sizes are inconsistent. The colors as well. It's just not a fun time here. And now I want to show you a website that utilizes grids. So we have Airbnb here, which is utilizing grids. We see in between each of these images there's consistent spacing. There's consistent spacings down here as well. We see there's consistent spacing here. Everything is lined up in the center right here. This is lined up in the center. We see that these are all on the same line as well. The left margin is the same as the right margin. The fonts are consistent, and they have a heading and kind of a subheading and a body text. And it communicates well. We want to be on this website. We don't want to leave it because it looks good. And part of the reason it looks good is that they're utilizing a grid. Having a grid can give you structure, can give you order, it can give you alignment, and overall it will create consistency, which will give you a good UI. And we know that having a good UI is going to keep customers coming back. Alright, so I'm going to start by building 3 different grids. We're going to build one for mobile, one for tablet, and one for desktop. The reason for this is we want whatever users viewing our website on or our design to look good on whatever device they're using. Because if they're viewing it on their phone, but we only designed it for desktop, it's not going to be a fun experience to them, and it's not going to look good. So we want to build for all 3 device types. That is known as responsive design, if you didn't know that. And I like to start with mobile first. It's known as mobile first design, so we're going to build mobile first, move to tablet, then we're going to move to desktop. You don't have to do it that way, but that's what I'd recommend, as most users are going to be viewing a website through a mobile phone, as they're so popular. And yeah, I just think it's easier to build from the mobile first, but feel free to do it however you want. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and design an 8-point grid system. All an 8-point grid system is it allows everything that we add to it to be divisible by 8. So if we add content blocks or whatever to this, it will be divisible by 8. This is really useful as it will create consistent UI and everything will just look better. If we wanted to, we could do a 4-point grid system, a 16-point grid system, but for this, an 8-point grid system will work fine. So I'm going to begin designing for mobile first. So if we go to frame here, I hit iPhone 14, it gives us our frame. To add the grid, I'm going to hit the plus icon right here, layout grid. I'm going to go right here, hit this icon. I'm going to change this from grid to columns. As you can see, it created these columns. We're going to change that to 4 columns. Next, we're going to want to leave the type on stretch. This just means as we adjust the size, the grid will stretch as well and be responsive to it. Next, we want spacing. We see the column here and we see the frame. We want space in between that as well as on the right side. So to do that, we'll set the margin to 20. As you can see, it created the space, and we can leave the gutter at 20. So the gutter is the space in between the columns, and the margin is space of the right of the frame and the column. So yeah, what this has done is created horizontal alignment. So for example, if I add a shape and I drag it here, you see that it snaps horizontally. So if I move it, we're getting these different snap marks as we go. So this is create a horizontal alignment. The only downside is we don't have vertical alignment. You see nothing's snapping. So to create vertical alignment, what we'll need to do is create another grid. So if we click on the frame and we click this plus icon and go here, we're going to change this to rows. For the count, we can do 1,000, 2,000. Actually, for this, we'll do 2,000. We're we're going to set the type to top, and we're going to set the height to 8. We want 8 because we're using an 8-point grid system. If we were using a 4-point grid system, we could do 4, so on. And we want the gutter to be 0. Now, what this has done is created vertical alignment. These spaces, we see that the intersections with the vertical columns and the row lines, it creates these intersections that create little spaces. These spaces are where content goes, and that's known as modules. So we're going to go ahead and create another rectangle. Now if we add this and we move this, we see it's snapping vertically now. If we hit the arrow key down, we're moving. Let me zoom in so you can see it. We're going to move by 1 pixel. Now, by default, if you hit shift and down, you're going to move by 10 pixels. I have mine set to 8, so it moves perfectly. But if we want to change that, what we have to do is go to the top left up here, go to preferences, go to nudge amount, and our small nudge is just when we move the arrow or hit an arrow key up or down. It's going to move by 1, that's fine. Our big nudge, we're going to want to set to 8. I think by default it's 10, but if you're using an 8-point grid system, you're going to want to change that to 8. If you're using 4-point, change it to 4, so on. So we want that to be 8, and again, you just hit shift down or shift up to move by 8. So what this has done is created a consistency. Everything will be divisible by 8, so this content will be, and the width, the height, so it just creates consistency. Another thing I want to mention finally is if we go to the right up here to the zoom tool, we can turn off this grid. So for say we want to see what it looks like without a grid, we can just, oh, I hit the wrong thing. We're going to want to change or turn off layout grids. So now we see it's gone, and if we want it back, we can hit it again as well. So yeah, that is layouts for mobile. I forgot to mention one thing. So when we add content to this, for example, I've added this rectangle. If I stretch this grid, or if I stretch the actual frame, we see the content isn't responsive with it. If we want to fix this, all we need to do is go over here, click on the content you added. You want to go to constraints, and instead of just leaving this on left, you want to add it to left and right. So when the frame resizes, this will resize with it. And so now if you look, and if I drag the frame, this resizes with it. And that is consistent with up and down too. So just wanted to clarify on that because I forgot to mention that. Alright, so moving on to creating a grid for tablet, we're going to go to the frame, and we're just going to grab us a tablet. We'll do the iPad mini 8.3. So what we can do is instead of reinventing the grid, we can take our old grid. So if I go to the iPhone frame, if I hover until I see this hand icon and the little sandwich grayed out menu icon pops up, we can click that, hit Control C, go back to the iPad frame and hit Control V. And I can just repeat that for the rows. Alright, so I've moved this grid over to the tablet grid. The problem with this is look at how much room we have, and look at how big the columns are. So we don't want that. We're going to want to make some adjustments. So if we go to the columns and click here, we're going to want to change the count to 8, as that's standard for a tablet, and we're going to want to change the margin to 70. As you can see, this gave us a lot more to work with, and overall this is going to be standard for a tablet grid. Alright, so moving to making a desktop grid, we're going to pretty much copy our previous steps. So go up here, grab us a frame, we're going to grab a desktop frame, and instead of grabbing the iPhone grid, we're going to grab the tablet grid. We're going to go ahead and copy the columns, and we are going to copy the rows. So same problem as last. When we move from iPhone to tablet, we have these huge columns. Now look at what's happened. We moved to tablet to desktop, and we have these huge columns. So we're going to want to fix that. We're going to click on the desktop frame, and we're going to manipulate the columns to 12. So, and we can leave the margin at 70. So now this is how you make a desktop grid. Alright, so before I get into a practical example, I want to go ahead and talk about text hierarchy. So all this is structured text. It's going to make your design more visually appealing, and it's going to be easier to navigate. It's made up of 3 sections: heading, subheading, and body, in that order. So you may already know what this is, but I'm going to go through it. So starting at the top, we're going to have the heading. It's going to grab the user's attention, and to do that, we're going to need to use bold, maybe some bright color, a big font. It's also, since it's going to be what the user sees first, we're going to make sure to convey the overall message that we're going to tell, but we want to keep it concise, kind of like a title. Underneath that, we're going to have the subheading. Subheading isn't going to grab the user's attention as much, but it still should a little bit. So maybe we could use a medium font weight, smaller font size than the heading, and maybe a duller color. What this is going to communicate is just, it hints at what we're going to talk about with our body, or maybe it's going to extend from our heading, so it gives a little bit more information about the heading. Underneath that, we're going to have our body text. Now the body text is going to be the least user grabbing, so we don't really want it to grab their attention too much, but this is going to be the body of the guts of the text. So we want to put all of our content that we need to communicate in that. So whatever information you want to tell, you tell it there. So don't worry if it's too text heavy. It should be a little bit, but not too much. So yeah, that is the structure that you want to follow. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and move along with a practical example. Do know that this isn't going to be anything huge. It's going to give you an idea on how you can use grids in your designs. So feel free to follow along with me.
Vanessa Beats got the heat.
Alright, so I want to go ahead and explain what I built a little bit. So I just created this info about a Ferrari F40. I'm going to go ahead and start with the text hierarchy. So you see I have a header, subheading, and body. Used very attention grabbing, bold, 80, yellow, and then dulled it down with the subheading, and then I conveyed all my information here, and it's the least user grabbing. Alright, now I want to talk about the grid. So starting off, I want to talk about this. So you see that we have the frame here and then the text. The margin in between is the same size from the image to this frame. The margin is the same. So that's already creating consistency. We see that all of my text is falling on this column line right here. The image is falling on this column line. There's a full-on column space right here. Everything is just lining up nicely, and the reason for that is because we're using grids. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a better idea on the power of grids and what you can use it for. And one thing I do want to mention is don't be afraid to break away from a grid. Sometimes it is good to have something a little bit off, so don't be afraid to break away from a grid, and don't be afraid of empty space. So you see I have all this empty space up here and I have space here. That's good. There's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, hopefully that all makes sense and you can start implementing this in your designs. Alright, so that's going to wrap up this video. Hopefully you learned a lot and you can start implementing grids and text hierarchy into your designs, as I think it will greatly improve your skills, and it's just going to give you much more consistent UI, and people will want to enjoy to be on your website or whatever your design is. So if you enjoyed this, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you have any questions, I will get to them, and if you want to see more videos like this, please let me know, and thanks.